At 90 years old, Arthur Jenkins had faced tanks in Europe, watched history unfold across continents, and lived to tell about it. But nothing prepared him for the jolt of a taser fired by a young officer on the steps of City Hall. It happened not in war, but during a peaceful protest he had quietly joined, leaning on his walker, holding a small American flag, and standing alongside fellow seniors, rallying for the preservation of veterans' healthcare benefits. Arthur wasn't chanting or shouting. He simply stood there, a silent symbol of sacrifice and resilience. The protest was orderly, comprised mostly of elderly veterans and citizens holding handmade signs. Still, local authorities deemed it an unlawful assembly and dispatched riot police in full gear. Among them was Officer Peterson, young and visibly nervous. When Arthur didn't move fast enough, or perhaps didn't move at all, Peterson took it as defiance. Within seconds, the crackling sound of a taser filled the air. Arthur collapsed onto the concrete, his flag falling beside him, his VFW cap rolling off as shocked protesters screamed in horror. This was no riot. This was an injustice. A decorated World War II veteran assaulted while exercising the very freedoms he once fought to defend. And in that moment, something deeper broke. Not just Arthur's frail body, but the public trust in those sworn to protect peaceful assembly. The moment Arthur Jenkins crumpled to the ground, his walker toppling and his flag landing beside him, the atmosphere shifted from peaceful protest to raw, unfiltered outrage. The crowd, mostly made up of elderly citizens and fellow veterans, erupted, not in violence, but in horrified disbelief. Cries of, "He's 90 years old," and "He's a war hero," rang out through the plaza. Protesters rushed to shield Arthur's frail body, some kneeling beside him, others standing between him and the advancing officers. Faces once filled with quiet determination now burned with fury. Tears streamed down one woman's cheeks as she screamed at the officers, "What are you doing? Are you proud of this?" Officer Peterson, still clutching his taser, stood frozen, the reality of his actions dawning like a harsh sunrise. Captain Miller, the commanding officer, hesitated for a split second, just long enough to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. While several protesters fumbled for their phones to call 911, one woman, a sharp-eyed protester in her 50s, pulled out a worn black card from her purse. She wasn't calling an ambulance. Others had that covered. She was calling someone with more reach. A retired military lawyer and longtime veterans advocate, she knew exactly who to contact. Within seconds, she was speaking directly with a high-ranking official in Washington, D.C., someone connected to both the Department of Veterans Affairs and federal oversight. Her voice, though controlled, was urgent and detailed. A 90-year-old WWII veteran was just tased by local police during a peaceful protest, she reported. His name is Arthur Jenkins. He was holding a flag. This happened at City Hall Plaza. The protest had a permit. It's about proposed cuts to veterans' benefits. We need help, real help, and fast. The voice on the other end was calm but decisive. Understood. Stay where you are. Help is on the way. Word of the call spread quickly through the crowd. The anger didn't fade, but it turned into a collective focus, a resolve to stand their ground and ensure Arthur was treated with the dignity he deserved. Some people started filming, others locked arms. Nobody was leaving. The officers, now noticeably tense, began to second-guess their formation. The protesters weren't threatening. They were devastated. They were furious. And they were right. Within minutes, the sound of sirens mingled with the low hum of murmured conversations and the occasional sharp word directed at the police. EMTs arrived and began tending to Arthur with care, but the damage had already been done. His pain wasn't just physical, it was the pain of betrayal. The man who once fought for freedom now lay on cold pavement, brought down not by an enemy overseas, but by someone sworn to serve and protect at home. The protest wasn't just about policy anymore. It had become a national reckoning. And for those who stood in that plaza, holding signs and each other, the urgency of the moment was now personal. They hadn't just witnessed a wrongful act. They'd seen a symbol of their generation attacked. And they weren't going to stay silent. The system had been warned. Now it was time to see who would answer the call. Just 8 minutes after the tasing of 90-year-old Arthur Jenkins, the atmosphere at City Hall Plaza transformed dramatically. The roar of the crowd and blare of sirens gave way to the deep, resonant hum of powerful engines as a convoy of sleek black SUVs emerged from around the corner. They rolled past police barricades as if they were paper obstacles, their tinted windows concealing the figures inside. The vehicles moved with chilling precision, coordinated, deliberate, and undeniably authoritative. Confused murmurs swept through the protest crowd. Even the riot police paused, momentarily unsure of what or who was approaching. The lead SUV stopped abruptly near the edge of the protest line, its doors opening before the engine had quieted. Men in dark suits stepped out, calm and composed, their earpieces glinting. They didn't draw weapons or shout commands. Instead, they moved with quiet purpose, forming a perimeter, not around the officers, but around the injured veteran lying on the pavement. Captain Miller, the officer in charge of the police presence, marched forward with authority, his voice rising in irritation. "Who the hell are you people? This is a restricted police operation." But before he could finish his sentence, one of the suited men turned, producing a small leather badge wallet and flipping it open in a swift motion. "Federal agents," he said coolly. "United States Secret Service, Dignitary Protection and Veterans Affairs Liaison Division. We're here for Mr. Arthur Jenkins." The effect was immediate. Miller's voice caught in his throat. His earlier bravado faded as the weight of the situation began to settle on his shoulders. He stammered a protest, but none came. His authority had just been superseded, publicly and unmistakably. Then the rear door of the central SUV opened, and from it stepped a tall, composed woman with unmistakable presence. She wore no badge or uniform, but every movement exuded command. It was Eleanor Vance, the newly appointed Secretary of Veterans Affairs, a former four-star general known for her fierce advocacy and uncompromising defense of veterans' rights. She had been in the city for a conference when the urgent call from Washington reached her. She wasted no time. Her eyes scanned the scene, the discarded signs, the stunned protesters, and the wounded old man who had once fought on foreign soil to protect the freedoms now being denied him at home. Without a word to Miller, she strode straight to Arthur, now being stabilized by paramedics. She knelt beside him, took his hand, and said gently, "Mr. Jenkins, I'm Secretary Eleanor Vance. I am so sorry for what was done to you today. This is an outrage, and it will not go unanswered." Arthur, groggy but alert, looked up in confusion. "Secretary, but why?" he asked softly. Her eyes flashed with quiet fury. "Because no man who fought for this country, should ever be tased for peacefully holding a flag on public ground." Then, rising to her full height, she turned to face the police. "Captain Miller," she said, her voice now firm and ringing with authority, "your actions today violated the rights of a veteran and a citizen. A full federal investigation is already underway. I suggest full cooperation immediately." Her words cut through the chaos like a blade. In 8 minutes, everything had changed. Justice had arrived, not with noise or force, but with the calm, unshakable authority of those who stand for what's right. As Secretary Eleanor Vance stepped onto the plaza, her presence brought an unmistakable shift in power. Dressed in understated civilian attire, she moved with the composed authority of someone who had commanded troops and now served as the nation's top advocate for its veterans. The noise of the crowd dimmed slightly as people turned to watch her stride past the line of stunned officers. Her face, though calm, betrayed a deep fury that only those who truly understand duty and sacrifice could recognize. She did not approach the police. Instead, she moved directly to Arthur Jenkins, the 90-year-old World War II veteran who now lay on a stretcher, bruised, shaken, and stunned from the unprovoked tasing by riot police just minutes earlier. "Mr. Jenkins," she said gently, kneeling beside him and taking his hand, "I'm Secretary Vance, Department of Veterans Affairs. I am so deeply sorry for what has happened to you today. This is not just unacceptable. It is an affront to every value this nation is supposed to stand for." Arthur's eyes fluttered open, his expression confused but touched. "I was just standing there," he whispered. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." Vance nodded solemnly. "I know. You were doing what every American has the right to do, peacefully exercising your voice, and that right was violated. Rising slowly, Secretary Vance turned to face Captain Miller, who had been standing off to the side, his earlier bravado now replaced with visible apprehension. "Captain," she said, her voice crisp and direct, "you tased a 90-year-old veteran of World War II on public ground during a permitted protest. Please explain to me how this fits your department's definition of protecting public safety." Miller stammered, attempting to cite unlawful assembly protocols and vague threats to officer safety, but Vance cut him off sharply. "Officer safety from a frail old man holding a flag standing behind a walker?" Her tone was now iron. "You had every opportunity to de-escalate, and instead you used force against someone who risked his life for this country before most of your officers were even born." She turned to her agents. "I want all body cam footage secured immediately. Any city surveillance, eyewitness statements, everything. We are launching a full federal investigation. And Captain Miller," she added with a cold glance, "your officers should consider themselves suspended from field duty until this review is complete." Miller said nothing. His command, once unquestioned, had unraveled in the space of moments. The secretary didn't stop there. Facing the crowd, many of whom had stayed despite the chaos, she raised her voice. "This is about more than just Mr. Jenkins. It's about the dignity and rights of every man and woman who has served this country. If a veteran cannot peacefully protest without being assaulted by the very institutions meant to protect them, then we have failed in our most basic responsibilities." Applause erupted from the protesters, their voices rising in support and gratitude. Eleanor Vance didn't come to the protest as a politician. She came as a soldier, as a servant of those who wore the uniform, and as a woman unwilling to let silence win over justice. Her firm, immediate action sent a message not just to the city's leadership, but to the entire nation, that veterans would not be disrespected, and that the government still had leaders willing to show up, stand firm, and speak with force when those who gave everything were treated like they were nothing. The tasing of 90-year-old veteran Arthur Jenkins sent shockwaves far beyond the city plaza. What began as a peaceful protest turned into a national reckoning on how we treat those who once wore our nation's uniform. The swift intervention by Secretary Eleanor Vance and federal agents didn't just restore dignity to one man. It ignited a broader conversation about civil rights, law enforcement accountability, and the sacred duty we owe to our veterans. Images of Arthur's fall and the powerful response that followed were broadcast nationwide, sparking outrage, solidarity, and swift legislative proposals aimed at protecting elderly and disabled demonstrators. Captain Miller and Officer Peterson faced suspension, and cities across the country began reevaluating their protest policing policies. Arthur Jenkins, once a quiet figure in a crowd, became a symbol of resilience and the price of silence in the face of injustice. Life teaches us that true courage isn't always loud. It's sometimes standing silently, even as the world moves against you. And real change doesn't always come from power. It often begins with one person daring to do what's right. Arthur stood for dignity. The secretary stood for justice. Together, they reminded a nation that honoring veterans means more than waving a flag. It means standing with them when it truly counts. If you believe no veteran should ever be silenced or mistreated, leave a comment below with the word respect. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that restore faith and defend what truly matters.